Good afternoon and welcome to our event, Future Diplomacy in the Middle East, the Challenges of Water, Energy and Climate. It's a particularly timely conversation. We've all just come out of what was a long, hot summer for the entire world, but particularly the MENA region. We saw the Mediterranean, a sea that 8 countries around the region share, warming to an alarming level over the summer. We saw 7 countries in the region experience temperatures above 50 degrees, most of those Gulf states. Next month, we see that the COP summit will be held in Egypt. The first time the COP summit is held in the MENA region. So this is a particularly timely conversation today, and we have a very distinguished panel joining us. Before I introduce our panel, I'd just like to mention that Friends of Europe is launching today its Iran in Focus program report. This report is the fruit of a year-long Iran in Focus program that Friends of Europe ran, which was overseen and curated by Nigar Mortazavi, a journalist and member of the Friends of Europe EYL program. The report is already available on the Friends of Europe website, so I encourage you all to have a look at that. But onto our panel. We have today 4 speakers. The first is Stephanie Williams, a former U.S. diplomat who has served in several senior-level positions with the UN in Libya, most recently as special advisor to the UN Secretary General. We have unfortunately, Yana Abu Talib, the Jordanian director of EcoPeace, has been unable to join us today due to unforeseen circumstances. We are, however, joined by her deputy, Abdurrahman Sultan. We have Cinzia Bianco, who's a visiting fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations and a specialist of the Gulf region. And then we have Martina Klimes, who's an advisor on water and peace for the Scientific Program Committee at the Stockholm International Water Institute. Welcome to all of you. Our format today, we will have our 4 speakers speak for 5 to 6 minutes introducing the topic, and then we will go into a wider conversation, including audience participation. So first of all, I would like to welcome Stephanie. Stephanie, you have been at the vanguard of this issue more recently, given Libya's particular vulnerability in this, a country where the economy is almost completely reliant on fossil fuels, a country that is particularly vulnerable to the impact of the climate emergency. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Mary. I hope my connection's okay, because you were breaking up a little bit, so let me know if you can hear me or not. Thanks so much for this opportunity. It's great to join everybody and to talk about this critical issue. I'm going to touch on 2 countries where I've served, one in both capacities as a U.S. and UN official, and that's Libya, but also Iraq, where I served more than 5 years ago as the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy. And there's the picture is rather bleak. You won't be surprised in both countries with regard to the climate emergency. And they have quite a lot in common. And I have written about some of their commonalities in a previous piece that I did for Brookings. But they are both, rentier economies, highly dependent on hydrocarbons. In the case of Libya, it's basically a one-crop economy. In Iraq, you have some diversification. Both have suffered from years of political violence, fragmentation, severely deteriorating infrastructure, electricity blackouts, hot summers, water shortages, and protests and conflict as a result of these deteriorating living conditions, misgovernance, rampant corruption. In Iraq, they're now suffering without having really a government, or at least a parliamentary approved government for every year. In the case of Libya, we're back to having, 2 governments. And of course, the crippling levels of corruption in both countries have not at all helped to start to address this critical issue. And then, of course, a lot of this is informed in the case of the inability of the state to respond is the plethora of armed groups who are predating on the state, and the fact that the state does not exercise the monopoly on the use of force. I don't need to tell you about the high levels of foreign intervention and the breaches of sovereignty in both countries. And this, utter lack of rule of law, no accountability, and gross violations of human rights. So the quality of life for the average citizen has deteriorated sharply. Look, in Libya, where I have spent many of the 4 out of 5 of the last years, they have the highest oil and gas reserves in Africa and the 9th largest in the world. It's a vast country with a very small population, but it leads Africa in the percentage in its per capita greenhouse gas emissions. Libya is kind of an environmental catastrophe, and it's particularly so for people in southern Libya. Where the temperatures are sweltering, where they suffer the most in terms of the lack of services, and as in Iraq, where you have a parallel situation in southern Iraq, you do have migration now, internal migration in Libya from southern Libya to particularly to the capital. In fact, there are now neighborhoods in the capital that are named after the south because of this internal migration. And in southern Iraq, you've seen migration to Basra. So both countries are highly water stressed. This is affecting agricultural production. In Libya, you have, in complicating the whole water situation, is this maintenance of the man-made river. This is one of Gaddafi's gargantuan projects, which on the face of it sounded quite, could have been quite a step forward, but maintaining this, it's a sort of the bespoke nature of this project means that maintenance is a challenge, and it's also been subject, so many wells have been subject to attack, and so it's become part of the conflict cycle. The electricity grid in both countries has, in particular in Libya, has completely collapsed. And it's deteriorated as a result of conflict as well. In Libya, of course, the climate migration is across borders as well as the situation deteriorates further south in Africa. I'll stop there, Mary, because then we can maybe talk later about what is the possible ways forward, because there are always things that we can all work on.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that very bracing assessment of both where Libya stands on this and also Iraq. I think one of the great things about the panel we have today is that we have a regional spread. So we go from North Africa to now Abdurrahman. Your focus is on Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. Can you give us an assessment of where that region stands right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Abdurrahman Sultan. I'm the Deputy Director in the Amman office, Ecofees, and I am the Regional Program Manager at large. I would like to apologize on behalf of our Jordanian Director, Yana Abu Talib. She was not able to attend today due to unforeseen health issues. But Yana and I are very happy and thankful for this opportunity to speak and to present in front of you today. I would like to say that the water situation and environment and energy situation in the Middle East are difficult and very complex. We have so many problems in our region. I would like to start from my personal experience where I live in South Amman, and we receive water once per week, a few hours per week, and this is the situation in most of the Jordanian cities and villages. People receive water in an uninterrupted fashion, and this makes the water situation very complicated and very difficult. We have many reasons to speak about how complex and how difficult the water situation and the natural due to natural factors. One is we are a marginal area, and we have water scarcity in our region, exacerbated by climate change, population growth, economic development, and increase of energy costs. So we have many natural factors that are limited at the moment. The geopolitical factor is also complex in our region between the divergence of the Jordan River basin. We have unresolved conflicts over the last 74 years that has resulted in competition over cross-border water resources, especially the Jordan River and its aquifers, its mountain aquifer in Palestine and in Israel. Disputed borders, we have disputed water rights, polluted environment, and endless blame games that continue to undermine any genuine effort to move forward. So simply we can say that we have a very complex region, and I would like to say that thinking strategically in this region is not something that is common, and we have many examples about that. I can give you an example from the COVID crisis that happened in the last few years. Here in Jordan, the government of Jordan mentioned that agriculture and food security is a priority, and allocated so much water resources into that domain. And what happened that excessive use of water, the results we are facing today in Jordan, that most of our dams and aquifers are going dry and empty, and this effect was seen in few years after that decision. So here we can see that those decisions were not strategic to start with. Another example that we can mention from our region, which is the Arab Spring. Again, it started with that poor man who killed himself in Tunisia, and then this wave of chaos that we have in this region that has resulted in 1.8 million Syrian refugees in Jordan, and it increased the pressure on our water resources and sanitation services, etc. So the Arab Spring did not only affect Jordan water resources, but also energy resources. And the sabotaging of the gas pipeline between Egypt and Jordan at that time, it was a wake-up call to the Jordanian government that we need to think in a strategic way, and the decision was taken to begin investment in renewable energy to create what we call energy security. So in investing in renewable energy proves that it is costly. When I look at from a holistic point of view, the first power purchase agreement at that time is or was 3 times higher than the cost of energy today. So at that time, thinking strategically again, the mission was not easy, it wasn't simple. On the Palestinian-Israeli front, I would like to mention that the situation is not less complicated. The discovery of gas on the Mediterranean helped Israel alleviate its water scarcity problem to a large extent, but also brought political grievances with it. Relevant Palestinian water and energy rights. So there is another issue here to discuss and to mention. It also triggered marine border disputes with Lebanon, which remain unresolved, might cause another wave of violence in this region. Both Lebanon and Syria at the moment, they are rivals the Jordan River, and without any peace agreement at the moment, cooperation is missing and it's limited and very much needed. In fact, Syria at the moment, since 1994, still continues to punish Jordan for the unilateral agreement that we did with Israel. They are blocking the flow of the Yarmouk River into the Jordan and downstream. So we can see that we have also very complicated regional situation, very complicated water situation and energy situation in this region, and all coming with a little bit of lots of chaos from so many other factors, Arab Spring, and climate change, and Corona. So we can see that the situation in the Middle East is very, very difficult, and it can lead to lots of human misery.
Thank you very much for that, Abdurrahman, and particularly your focus on the how tricky the politics of this can be as well. We'll turn now to Cinzia. And Cinzia, your assessment, please, of how this issue, this challenge is playing out in the Gulf region.
Thank you very much, and thank you for, obviously it is a topical theme, and we have heard already from my co-speakers that this is indeed a monumental challenge throughout the Middle East and North Africa region. This is possibly, in some cases, even an existential challenge for not only the poorest strata of population, but I would argue also in general for the structures, the institutional structures, the way we see them today. And we're starting to see, many, for example, protests and in general political instability induced by people grieving, the fact that they don't have access to water or to electricity, or that their level of pollution in some cases is so high to create health emergencies. So we're really starting to see an impact across the board, not only on society, but also immense cost on economy and on society. And I from the start that this is obviously very different in the GCC monarchies, the Gulf monarchies that I've been focusing on in my job for so long. They, have a different outlook on these crises, and they have different ways of trying to contain the potential spillovers on, in particular, economic and political stability. The GCC monarchies are obviously very wealthy states, and they do deploy this wealth to try and adapt, or rather than even to mitigate some of these challenges. So, for example, as you were reminding us in the beginning, these are countries that experience some of the highest temperatures in the region, but at the same time, they also have developed ways of adapting to these prohibitive temperatures by, for example, investing in weather, even in weather mitigation techniques and technologies in some cases. So, for example, one of the sort of clearest examples is the rain enhancement program that the UAE has been working with for years already, whereby they use cloud seeding to generate rain from some of the clouds that wouldn't rain otherwise. And then now the evolution of this program, which is cloud busting drones, which is basically flying drones that shoot electrical charges at clouds to make them rain. And this is obviously, it sounds, in some cases it sounds futuristic, in some cases it sounds like these countries are trying to basically confront the effects of these monumental challenges without necessarily looking at the root causes of the climate emergency, which is obviously very prominent also in the GCC countries. And that, to some extent, I would say is true. But at the same time, it's also true that some of those effects cannot be contained, and there is a new awareness of an acknowledgement of these. So, for example, we have already touched briefly on temperatures, which are absolutely out of control and are projected to become really worse over the next decade. We do have, of course, a major issue with water scarcity if we look at groundwater reserves and aquifers. Then, how do the GCC countries sort of tackle this problem is by making a massive use of desalination. And they do have quite impressive desalination capacities, and they have, they are also quite advanced in, for example, treating wastewater, which is, of course, very important and very useful, so that they don't actually experience water scarcity in their day-to-day lives. But at the same time, these ways of confronting the challenge also has costs. And for example, the salinity in the Gulf is rising and rising due to the discharge from desalination plants. These discharges can include, brine, for example, which is quite toxic for the marine environment. And so, in a way, that issue has also other repercussions, not only because in the end it could end up infiltrating groundwaters and aquifers, rendering that water useless, but also because it affects, for example, the livelihood of the habitats of the marine and the coastal fauna, for example. And fishery is still an important economic sector for some of those GCC countries. And then the other challenge is obviously air pollution, and air pollution is also connected to the fossil fuel industry. So obviously these countries, for these countries, the fossil fuel industry is the single most important source of wealth. So it is, largely protected and cherished, and it is incredibly difficult politically and economically to see some really sort of forceful interventions into the fossil fuel industry to make that more compliant with environmental needs, for example. At the same time, there is also a growing awareness of the costs of air pollution in particular, and that has become even clearer after the COVID-19 pandemic, because there is scientific evidence that an extremely polluted air has also worsened significantly the effect of COVID-19, and also rendered the population more prone to basically getting that infection and other viruses that operate in a similar way. So the air pollution aspect is becoming more and more important. And for example, there is now a case in Kuwait, a court case that is really sort of challenging the government and the fossil fuel industry on the pollution that results from improper management of waste produced. So overall, it's a very mixed picture, incredibly different from other countries of the wider Middle East and North Africa region. I would say completely different, but at the same time, there are some challenges. These challenges are perhaps too big to be kept under control or mitigated or adapted to in the ways that we are seeing.
Thank you very much for that, Cinzia. We'll move on to Martina next. Martina, you have written and spoken a lot about what you describe, or what others describe as well, as water diplomacy. So could you first of all explain to our audience what is water diplomacy, and give some examples of how water diplomacy has played out in the MENA region and how it could play out in the region in the future?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with the interesting panel, and I'm also looking forward to the discussions and questions later. But first, what is water diplomacy? I think some people would like to think that water diplomacy may be a silver bullet. It's a solution that would help us solve some of these immense challenges. But we really cannot think about it like this, because water diplomacy, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for a process, multi-track process that's connecting the technical side, the technical knowledge of these challenges, with the political track, where we really have to find political will to implement changes, to reach very difficult agreements, to make concessions. So water diplomacy, in simple words, is focusing, among other things, on finding connections between these technical processes and political processes. On one hand, we do not want to politicize a water-related process. We do not want to politicize meetings between technical experts, but on the other hand, we do need the political will to implement some of these very difficult decisions. So other aspect of water diplomacy, it can work at different scales. Water diplomacy is not only a process between states, it can also work at a subnational level. We can also have water diplomacy processes at community level, where we are trying to bring together actors that share a water resource and find a sustainable way how they can cooperate together. So other myth about water diplomacy is that water diplomacy is only for conflict resolution. Water diplomacy, in fact, is also something that can help us to build relations and strengthen relations. It helps us to create meeting opportunities between actors that do not normally meet, because there are not so many natural platforms for meeting between technical experts from countries that may not have very good relations, or neighboring countries that have many bilateral difficulties. So water diplomacy processes can play this important role. And I'm aware that, like, when I'm describing it like this to many of you, it may seem still quite abstract. You can still be thinking, what is she really talking about? What is water diplomacy? So I would like to give you one example. Between years 2013 and 2018, we worked with the countries that share the rivers Euphrates and Tigris, and that is Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, in different capacity, on establishing shared knowledge of how much water is there now in the basin, how much water there will be in the future, and what are the needs of the different actors, different sectors, and how this region will look, for example, in 50 years' time. And also help ask the very difficult question. Imagine this region without political border. How could we use the water if we could, for example, optimize use upstream for some sectors? And then how can we really take benefits of the processes that we can do downstream? And we would have technical meetings with technical representatives of these countries. Because of the challenges in Syria, we worked with independent experts. But for some time, we really did have representatives from Turkey, Iraq, and Iran working together and discussing shared challenges. And if you then look into these processes without the sensation from the political processes, you see that there is a lot of will to cooperate. There are so many shared issues. There are so many these, what we see, lowest hanging fruits. But what is difficult is to connect it to these political processes and really find political will to make a sustainable change. To when we, for example, decide now we will focus on water quality, and then we will put really these projects in life on a whole transboundary scale, that can be sometimes challenging if there is no political will. So other examples of what we could also say water diplomacy, I think a big success is the agreement from last year between Jordan, Israel, and United Arab Emirates about the exchange between energy, the solar energy that will go to Israel for desalination processes, and then desalinated water will go to Jordan. We would also label this as a process of water diplomacy because it contributed to addressing the water challenges in the region. And I would really like to hear the views from the others about this process, but I would label this as a success. And some of the trends that we see in water diplomacy is that context really matters. There is not a silver bullet for one process, and there is not some kind of silver line that we can say, and then we say that this is the magical formula that works. It's really, we have to always contextualize it. So be very much aware of the developments and of where is the right time to get engaged. So the actors, the different organizations who support countries with these processes have to be always on their toes and have to be ready when it's the right time to, for example, convene a meeting. The other thing is that these processes need to be inclusive, and they need to be inclusive across different sectors. We also need to have gender inclusivity, and we also have to have the people who are affected by this. They need to have a say. We need to hear from them. We need to hear how they are being affected. So that's also an important part. And lastly, communication and public awareness. It's extremely important. It's very important to communicate with the general public about the challenges that lie ahead and the solutions that we are trying to find and that the governments are trying to find. I'm very much aware that this is very difficult in every country of the world, but of course there are certain additional challenges in some of the MENA countries. So this is really something that we are continuing to work on, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you very much, Martina. Before we go to the wider discussion with the audience, I'm going to ask some of our panelists questions. I would encourage the audience to please raise your hand if you have a question or comment to our speakers. But first of all, Stephanie, I'd like to go back to you. And given your work with the UN on Libya, to what extent were these issues that we've heard about so far in our session, to what extent were they part of the diplomatic conversation in and on Libya? Over the last year or so, I've been struck by the fact that British officials, for example, have wanted to publicly highlight that in their bilateral meetings with Libyan officials, they are prioritizing Libya's green transition. That's very, very new, and I don't see other countries wanting to kind of publicly highlight that approach as well. So to what extent are these issues part of the diplomatic conversation on Libya? To what extent should they be, and how could they be brought into the conversation more?
Yeah, so you won't be surprised that unfortunately they are not as high a priority in terms of international discussions on Libya as they should be. And that's because everyone is so immersed in today's crisis, tamping it down, working with the conflict parties directly. I do think that there are ways in Libya that this can be more, this particular set of issues can be more mainstream into the political or the peace process writ large. And certainly, Martina touched on it in terms of ensuring that there's a diversity of views, that the process is more inclusive. This can be done in terms of, working with, NGOs, raising awareness, and particularly amongst the youth in Libya, who are going to be the ones who are most affected by the continuation of this climate emergency in the country. But also focusing more on decentralization in Libya, which I think, everyone, there's a great focus on what I call negative power sharing, which is the executive arrangements in Tripoli, which is the game that everyone likes to play, including the internationals. But positive power sharing in Libya is a focus on decentralization. And here I think, the European Union can do more, and they can tie decentralization efforts directly with, building awareness and starting, the process on climate awareness and change in Libya, in the communities that are most affected, in southern Libya, in many of these smaller cities outside of Tripoli, which don't get any attention, but which are where you see a great sort of suffering and misery.
Thank you, Stephanie. Abdurrahman, obviously you are with EcoPeace, one of the NGOs highlighting these issues across the region. Stephanie touched there on the role of civil society, as did Martina earlier. What are the challenges for civil society in this respect? I mean, we look across the region, majority of governments are authoritarian. There is a shrinking civil society space in so many different parts of the region over the last decade. What are the challenges in terms of civil society making its voice heard? The kind of grassroots efforts to basically force governments across the region to pay more attention to these issues than they are doing up to now?
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, there are many challenges facing the civil society to send their voices and messaging to the government. One of those challenges is the capacity building of the NGO themselves. So they need lots of assistance, lots of training, and lots of support in order to be able to do so. At EcoPeace, we've been working since a long time, and we've been ourselves into a learning experience since 1994, and therefore we think and believe that the role of an NGO is critical to support the government, not only to oppose the government, but also to support the government through lots of research and process, how to implement the different initiatives on the ground. So we are based on science. We are working together to make sure that we look at the issues, the concerns from a holistic point of view, from environmental, social, economical, and many other point of view, to make sure that we create what we call a win-win situation for all the parties. This is something that we are definitely convinced, and we work on that. I would like to mention that in the last year, as Martina mentioned, the water diplomacy was helpful for us, and we were able to initiate what we call the Green Blue Deal of the Middle East, and under the climate diplomacy, and there we were able to sign the letter of intent between Israel and Jordan, and the letter of intent helps both countries to provide competitive advantages that each country has. Jordan will produce the required renewable energy in the Middle East, while Israel can, because of the technological advancement that we have on the Mediterranean in desalination, they will be able to produce what is needed in the water, from the water side. So Jordan will be able to receive, if completed, around 200 million cubic meters of water per year, while Israel will be able to receive 600 megawatt hour again per year. This is something that is really important to make sure that we create a win-win situation. If I speak about the solutions, can I go over the solutions now, or shall I wait?
I just want to go to Cinzia first before we open up to the audience. So we'll come back to you on that. But Cinzia, you were talking about how particular Gulf states, most notably the UAE, try to project itself as a kind of a visionary in this sense. You mentioned the various technologies it's been engaging in, the cloud seeding program, etc. Moving on to this question of regional cooperation, whether we're talking at the level of the Arab League or the GCC, to what extent are these considered shared challenges that need to be collectively addressed? So, for example, when it comes to the UAE, to what extent is the UAE willing to share these technologies with other parts of the region and meet these shared challenges in a collective way?
So that's an excellent question, and that's exactly what we've been working on at ECFR. As a matter of fact, we're about to publish a policy brief which I've authored that sort of talks about and gives ideas on how Europeans can encourage the Gulf countries in particular to regionalize these environmental security challenges in a constructive way. So how you can sort of nudge regional cooperation on more sort of positively or sort of seriously engaging vis-a-vis environmental security challenges, because at present the reality unfortunately is that instances of regional cooperation on these topics remain really scarce. I would have to say that there is some positive movement, which is that vis-a-vis the past years, at least we're starting to hear conversations on this topic. So sort of states coming up with ideas for at least conferences or workshops or summits even. So at the high-level political between high-level political leaders talking about these challenges, and that's already an important first step. I mean, in the paper, in the policy brief that is upcoming, we also look at, for example, how to include Iran into this picture. And we note that, when the Iranians convened regional ministers in July, they chose environmental security as a topic, as the major topic of discussion. And then, for example, there is, of course, the Saudi Middle East Green Initiative that is, it says in the name, it is already has that ambition of outlook to regionalize some of the ideas to combat in some aspects, climate change and
Chinzi, I'm just going to interrupt you there because we will return to this. I just want to bring in some of our audience at this point. So I'm going to take questions in bunches of 3. The first question I would ask you all to, first of all, give your first name, your affiliation, and keep your question or remark succinct. So our first questioner is Paul Arts. Paul? Paul,
yes, hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I also put my question in the chat, so I can just repeat what I wrote. Martina,
Paul, could you please introduce yourself first, your affiliation, please?
Yes, of course. My name is Paul Arts. I have been working at the University of Amsterdam for many years, teaching international relations and Middle East politics. My question concerns the notion of inclusivity, which was rightly stressed by Martina in her intervention. And she also mentioned as an example of cooperation the agreement which was reached between UAE, Jordan and Israel. Now my question is, are the Palestinians included in this cooperation agreement? And which I doubt, but maybe I'm wrong. So if inclusivity is so important, can you leave an important actor in the region, which is very much disenfranchised, as we all know? Can you leave that actor out?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And next we'll go to Halabu Gagish.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hala. I'm the director of Resource Center. I'm a Libyan researcher and consultant as well. So I don't really have a question, but I have an observation. Recently, I've worked on a research concerned to the peace processes that happened recently in Libya. And I think there is things that we should take in consideration whenever we talk about the climate and the arena. First, that the countries in the MENA region are not the same. Iraq, Libya, Yemen, they're all are undergoing conflicts and political instability. It's not the same when you're discussing these issues in countries where they have relative stability. So it's very, very important that we do not include that the MENA region is all the same. It's not. And of course, I've worked on the ground for a long time in Libya, and I know that the policymakers in the country, they don't take these issues seriously. They don't see it as the priority. But I want to highlight more the international take on this issue. So recently in my research, we've worked on the Security Council resolutions in Libya, and we've noticed that whenever it comes to talk about the climate change, environmental impact of the conflict, and all of these things, there is no much of a stress or emphasis on the importance of doing action plans or to deal with these issues like the water issues that's really going severe now in Libya. So all of these, most of these resolutions were talking in ambiguous, very general terms when it comes to this, and there was no stress enough on how important are these issues to the country, that as you mentioned in your introduction, that it's going through a serious risk when it comes to climate change. So I think this is my comment. I think there should be more work from the international part of how to include the climate change, these environmental issues in a more serious way, that it's more of existential, necessity, as we say. So,
thank you, Hala. Thank you. And Abduladim Abedi, I know you're joining us from the Libyan Foreign Ministry. I will wait and include you in the next bunch of questions. I will go to Jonas Adaye first. Jonas.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope I can be heard.
We can hear you. If you will introduce yourself and give your affiliation, please.
I'm affiliated to Addis Ababa University, and I'm Associate Professor of Peace Studies at Addis University in Peace and Security Studies Department or Institute. I have already posted my questions there for all to be clearly seen. I'm really grateful to excellent presentations made by all the panelists, and particularly the role of context in water diplomacy as decisive and key. That's really very important. So my question is, how do we explain the underlying or structural cause for the entire challenge of water security or energy or environmental aspects? If we really dig deeper, we can see it is not really the Middle East that is primarily responsible for the very impact of environmental degradation or that of climate change. It is some total of global security aspects. So, which really shows that it is caused by collective agents. Therefore, it should be also solved by
Thank you, Yunus, and thank you, Yunus, for touching on that. And then that also opens up the wider question of climate justice. Some people in the region, some people elsewhere in the world talk of climate reparations. It's expected that we'll be hearing a lot about this at the COP summit in Egypt next month. And speaking of Egypt, I'm going to break my own rule in terms of bunches of 3 questions, but I want to bring in Ambassador Badr Abdelati with his question. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the floor, and grateful to the Friends of Europe for organizing such important and timely seminar. And, I don't have a question, but rather a comment with regard COP27, and as you know, we are heading closer and closer now to have the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Well, and Ambassador, just to be clear to our audience, you are the Egyptian ambassador here in Brussels. So just to clarify that, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. I'm the ambassador to the EU, to Belgium, Luxembourg, and NATO. The issue of water scarcity and water security is on the top of the agenda of COP27. Egypt is fully convinced that there is a nexus between water scarcity, drought, and instigating conflicts, especially in our continent, in Africa, mainly in the Sahel region and in the Horn of Africa. So it's a geostrategic political problem and issue. We designate thematic days. One will be dealing with the issue of drought, especially that we have 174 million Africans suffered from the drought from in the period between 2010 till 2022. So it's an important issue. And it's an important issue for Egypt as well, with the country with the magnitude of 109 million people.
Indeed.
Relying heavily on.
Indeed, Ambassador, if I may, we've heard a lot today about criticisms of governments across the region, that they are not taking the challenges seriously enough, that they are not being ambitious enough. We've heard about the space that civil society is trying to find in what are increasingly authoritarian spaces across the region. What would you say to those critiques?
We are quite open. My foreign minister and the president-designate of COP27 went to Copenhagen, to Bonn, to meet with representatives of civil society, to encourage, to invite them to come to participate in the COP27. We have to be careful on that when it comes to the participation of civil society. All registration is happening through the UNFCCC in Bonn. It's not through the government of Egypt. Egypt is only responsible for the invitation of the heads of governments and heads of states. But the participation of civil society is on the hand of the United Nations Framework Climate Change Convention in Bonn. without the participation of the civil society, I mean, we cannot have a concrete deliverables out of this COP. We designated a huge area called the Green Zone for civil society to participate, to have their own activities in order to deliver their voices, their concerns to the heads of states and governments. It's closer to the blue zone where the heads of states and governments would be meeting.
Thank you, Ambassador. We're actually fast running out of time, but it's very good to hear that civil society will be allowed a robust space at the COP summit next month. Very quickly, to go back to our panelists, because some of our audience have raised some interesting issues. Martina, I would like to go back to you on the question of climate justice that Jonas raised, the wider question of reparations. You know, are we talking about a situation where very soon we will see these issues as part of the diplomatic conversation inside the region and with the region?
I sincerely believe so and hope so. I think, Mary, that what we have to realize that we already have the technical solutions. We already know what needs to be done. The challenge remains how to implement this. And I know that there was the discussion of different participants in different processes. This is all very challenging then to put it in motion. It's very challenging then to move it. So I think that that will really, and I think we will see more pressure on that. We will see more protests. We will see more of the marginalized communities being more affected. We will see more of youth being affected. Youth who are destined to probably work in the agriculture sector will just not have these jobs. These jobs will not be available, and there will be lots of frustration. And so we will see definitely much more pressure, and it will pressure governments to act on this, because it will really then manifest that this is also issues of national security. And then the connection between technical solutions, which we already have them. We know what needs to be done in different cases. And it will, I do believe that it will push different actors to take this matter more seriously. But of course, I also would like to say that there is a really good that's being done. There are really many processes that are already working, and I think this inclusivity is extremely important.
Okay. Martina, very quickly, would you like to very quickly address Paul's question about Palestinians being included?
I think actually that's our colleague from the EcoPeace Middle East is better positioned to answer that question, because
okay, great. Okay, thank you, Martina, because we have just over 5 minutes to go. Abdurrahman, did you want to address very quickly that question of inclusion of the Palestinians?
Yes, definitely. We as EcoPeace, we believe in inclusivity. We believe that the Palestinians and all people in this region should be included in the process of solving the problems. Yes, we have some political challenges that we face at the moment, but as a regional organization, we are promoting regional discussion. And
thank you. Thank you, Abdurrahman. I know I am rattling through this here because we're fast running out of time. But Stephanie, did you want to address what Hala Bougagish was saying in terms of the international approach here and the need for that conversation to change?
Yes, I mean, I completely agree. And look, there is already an international process which is in place for the Libya conflict, and that's the Berlin process. And there is, in fact, an economic track which has in the past focused more exclusively on the Central Bank of Libya and on the National Oil Corporation. But I think it is also could be an entry point for more, I think, robust discussions on water security in Libya, on the need for infrastructure repair and development, particularly desalination plants, water treatment plants, but also, I mean, to really push as much as one possibly can with the horrible political class in Libya, the need for subsidy reform, and particularly fuel subsidy reform.
Thank you, Stephanie. We're down to our last minutes. What I would like to end with is basically to ask all our four panelists what takeaways they would like to leave our audience with today. We have quite a few diplomats in our audience today coming from diplomatic missions from the region here in Brussels, but also EU diplomats. What takeaways would you recommend for those in the audience who are thinking about how to incorporate the climate emergency into diplomatic conversations within and with the MENA region. I'll start with Cinzia.
I think in a nutshell, one has to start really highlighting very, very openly the costs on all other domains, the economic cost and the political cost, and very soon also the security cost of the environmental challenges.
Thank you, Cinzia. Martina?
Communication is very important. So invest also in communication across different groups in the Middle East. Talk to them about these challenges and listen to their suggestions for solution. So communication and awareness.
Thank you, Martina. Abdurrahman.
Yes, we would like to take this opportunity and say that the climate crisis should take us to think that the climate could be a multiplier of opportunity rather than a risk, and that therefore we need to cooperate on a regional level and also in a super-regional level with Europe and many other continents to solve the water, energy and refugee problems in this globe.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. And Stephanie, as the former diplomat on our panel today, what takeaways would you recommend?
Well, I think all the other panelists have been so eloquent in wrapping this up, but to say don't silo this issue. This isn't a purely sort of technical issue, to be handled by sort of just discrete experts. That it is now front and center and should be, I think, and is in some cases already mainstreamed into broader discussions on peace and security in the region.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So just to sum up, it has been a very dispiriting conversation today. In many ways, we've heard about environmental catastrophe in Libya. We've heard Cinzia refer to this being very much an existential question for the region. We heard Abdurrahman talk about possible waves of violence in the region emanating from these challenges. But then something of a positive from Martina in terms of the potential of water diplomacy, in terms of the current conversation and the future conversation within and with the region. Let's see how the COP summit goes in Egypt next month. Again, it was very heartening to hear the Egyptian ambassador say that we can expect a robust civil society aspect of that conversation. So we'll leave it with that. Here's hoping there will be some substantial outcomes from the COP summit next month. Thank you all very much for being with us today, for your contributions, and looking forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.